Hey guys, CVH here with BetweenTheLanes.net, and we have another deck tech for you today. Today, as you can see on the screen, we'll be going over a Ramp Scout deck, so agility and endurance cards. I do want to get back to doing more deck techs. I took a lot of the month last month to play formats other than ranked, as you all probably know if you're watching my stream, but I wanted to start this month with a deck tech of a deck that I've been using on the ladder in the streams recently, so you can see what my card choices are. I'm not going to say this is a final draft or anything, but this is a very popular deck at the moment, and a lot of the reason I'm playing it and other people are playing it is to see if we can get value out of the new monthly card we got for the ladder last season, which is Hist Grove. So 3-drop support here. Summon +1 max Magicka when you have 15 or more max Magicka. Sacrifice this to summon an 8/8 Swamp Leviathan in each lane. So there were some mixed opinions about this card when it was first released, but everyone could tell that if there was a deck it would be good in, it would be Ramp Scout. Ramp Scout, not really a new deck at all, so I won't be talking too much about it because we already know kind of how the deck operated before Hist Grove. Mostly be talking about whether or not I think, or like how good I think Hist Grove is currently, but let's go through the card choices anyway so I can just show you what I'm running and if there's any specific reasons why, then we can go over some conclusions I've made about Hist Grove so far and other cards to consider. So the top end, really self-explanatory stuff. We have Ungolem, which is immense value, Fighter's Guild Recruit, which is one of the staple agility cards, Murkwater, which very fantastic if a lot of people are playing Fighter's Guild Recruit, and then a deck with Leaf Lurker because you can proc a Leaf Lurker very easily. Thieves Guild Recruit, one of the best cards for a Ramp Scout deck since the deck has fairly limited cycle and this is a pretty good card draw. Trades with some things that are very tiny against aggro decks, and of course there's a lot of cards in this deck that cost 7 or more Magicka, so the reduction actually happens a surprising amount of the time, and reducing something like a Blood Magic Lord or Chorus Reaper can be game-ending. Windcube Spellsword, one of the best 2-drops, if not the best 2-drop in the game, trades super efficiently against anything that's putting pressure on the board early. A 3 Crushing Blow, good removal for the deck because we don't have access to Lightning Bolt, good, burst to end the game. So Hist Grove is the card. I guess I'm just going to skip over this right now and talk about it when I get done the cards that we're basically sure of in the deck. 3 House Kinsman and 2 Young Mammoth. These are sort of like the solid 3-drops that I'm playing to trade with other things. Most lists that I've seen don't run both of these. A few have, but mostly the mid-range decks that don't focus too much on the late game are playing these. I'm using this in ramps just so I can have guaranteed cards that can trade with my opponent's cards. I have seen a lot of people running, in place of one of these recently at least, the Snake Tooth Necklace as a 1 or a 2 of. This is a card I definitely want to test. I didn't want to put it in the list for right now because I don't want to really endorse a card as a 2 of that I honestly haven't tested at all, but I've heard people have really good results with this, especially in conjunction with the 8/8s you're playing off of the Hist Groves. So that's something to consider over the 3-drops, but I haven't minded these if you're playing against other decks that want to put pressure on the board early so you can take control, and these really do help you turn up the heat if you decide that you don't want to go to the super late game in the mirror, you just have a really good curve, so you start hitting them and see where that goes. Perfectly viable strategy. 1 Mummify, I had 2 in here, that definitely felt like too many, especially because we already have like 4 different ways to silence cards in this deck between the Shadowfen Priest and the Red Brahmin. But 1 seems okay. I was considering even taking it out, but it's a pretty reasonable card, not much to talk about there, just it gets clunky if you're running more than 1, I think. Treeminder sort of suffers the same fate. I didn't even like playing this at all when I was playing Ramp Scout before Hist Grove, but it's important to have those ways to increase your max Magicka. Like the Thorn Hist Mage is probably the best way to do so, but Treeminder is another way. So we have 4 outside of the Hist Grove, that's 7, and all you need to do is go up to 15 to start activating the Hist Groves. A thing about Treeminder that I like is that if you're already at 14, you can just play the Treeminder and immediately get the max Magicka, whereas something like Arcane Venom Tongue, or however you say that card's name, does not immediately give you the max Magicka. However, even though it's probably best on 3 or in the super late game, it's still not very good on 3, if that makes a whole lot of sense, so I don't like playing more than 1. Occasionally you will play this or Hist Grove on 3. You don't really feel good about playing Hist Grove on 3 though, because it could get destroyed. But really, the only cards that make that worthwhile are Thorn Hist Mage, because you get a turn 4th Hist Mage in that scenario. So Treeminder mostly just there to give you 1 more max Magicka ramp. At more than a 1 of, I think it just starts becoming worse than the Young Mammoth slots because you trade less efficiently with virtually everything. 3 Whereabouts, shouldn't really need to talk about this card. The best way green has basically to gain life. Obviously the Snake Tooth Necklace is a consideration, but this card can single-handedly turn games around against aggressive decks, so I do think you should be playing 3 of these. Even if the meta is slightly slower than it has been before, I guess. 3 Preserve of the Roots, fantastic card for ramp, talked about this in my video on good epics. Leaf Lurker, I believe I also mentioned this one, fantastic removal for a deck without Piercing Javelin. Shadowfen Priest, best silence in the game in my opinion, also interacts with supports, so if they do happen to play Hist Grove early, or obviously against decks with Divine Fervor, this card is standout. Absolutely a fantastic card. And when I took out the Mummify, having 3 of these really does help with that, because Mummify can answer a threat that's dropped in the Shadow lane, one of the only ways to do so since we don't have the Javelin. But if we have something that can trade in the Shadow lane already, all we have to do is play the Shadowfen Priest, silence it, the card will lose cover, we can attack it, things will be great. Thornhist Mage, the best Magicka ramp in the game, in my opinion. 5-drop 2-5, which becomes a 3-5 immediately, and can spiral out of control if left alone, or most likely just protect the lane against some aggression. 2 Chorus Reaper. I don't think it's necessarily always a 2 of. I don't think it's a 3 of, especially in this meta, because it's kind of a slower meta. I could see going down to 1 or even cutting it for something else, but it's a pretty reasonable card right now. A lot of people playing green, a lot of people playing Fighters Guild Recruit because they're playing green, and a lot of people are playing Crusader to counter this deck, and this is a pretty constantly live card against that deck, so perfectly fine. Nahagleave, one of the best guards. We're trying to save our own life, basically, and not go down too low so we don't have to rely on getting our whereabouts. Or the Snake Tooth Necklace if you happen to be running it. So this is one of the ways we can stall, protect our life total, and get to the late game where we drop things like Blood Magic Lord and Swamp Leviathans. Tazcad is probably the best way to close the game. A lot of the time it functions as removal in this deck. You just drop it down, kill something with 6 health or less. So Blood Magic Lord is a 3 of in my version, but definitely not a 3 of in all the versions that I've been seeing. I do think it's worthwhile currently because I'm playing against a lot of mirror matches, a lot of people playing this deck, and Blood Magic Lord can really tilt the game in your favor before Hist Grove even has a chance to be live for your opponent. Getting something like Raise Dead is just insane, or you can even get Drain Life to close out the game. All of the Blood Magic spells obviously are pretty fantastic value. So I like 3 of currently. It is a very slow card though, so if the meta becomes more aggressive, I don't recommend playing all 3 of these. Red Brahmin, just a staple in this archetype. It's just so good. You silence the entire lane, shackle the entire lane. This is one of the ways you could potentially even stage a comeback if your opponent just played like double Hist Grove and has double Swamp Leviathan. You can like erase them down and drop this and prevent them from killing you with 32 damage of Swamp Leviathans effectively. But yeah, just in general, this is a card that is never really bad in any matchup and one of the best cards that these colors have access to. And Odahviing is our one major sweeper. We don't really have access to sweepers in this deck, no Dawn's Wrath, no Ice Storm, so Odahviing seems like a must-include for me. And now we can discuss, well, before I discuss the Hist Grove, I want to talk about one other thing that I did cut. A lot of people were playing the Black Marsh Wardens in this deck, as I was too, as a 2 of. But what it does, it's not really good in the early game, obviously. Like our 3 and 4 drops are always better than Black Marsh Warden on turn 4. In the late game, it was pretty good, but bad against Control Mage because it's very Ice Stormable and very Fireboltable. Hist Grove is another thing that's not very good in the early game. Sometimes we need the ramp on turn 3 to fight aggro, though, and then it's kind of reasonable because then we can play a turn 4 Hist Mage and survive. But in the late game, this is much better against Control Mage than the Black Marsh Warden because it's not really easily killed by any removal. Even Manticora only deals with one of the Swamp Leviathans, and now that Manticora only kills something in its own lane, it can't even protect against the other one. So this card is definitely doing what Black Marsh Warden wanted to do, but slightly better in my opinion, as long as you can get the 15, which shouldn't be your big issue. But yeah, this card definitely seems good in this deck. I'm not going to say it's broken or anything, but I definitely thought it would be a lot worse than it is. As I expected, the Magicka ramp part of it isn't really the part that you care about. In fact, a lot of people are playing this earlier than 15, and I think you have to be pretty desperate to do that in certain matchups. For example, the mirror match, I don't think I would ever want to play it. I have loaded 3 Magicka before when I could have played a Hist Grove, just because I know that, like, 10 turns down the line, Hist Grove might win me the game, but if it gets Shadowfen Priested, I'm just giving my opponent the best target in the deck for Shadowfen Priest, and preventing 16/16 of stats from coming out that much later in the game. So if you know the game is going to go late, and you know your opponent is playing the support removal, I caution against playing this card early. But if you are up against an aggro deck, like I mentioned, and this is somehow the only play you have in your hand, and you have a good follow-up play, it's perfectly reasonable. But there are counters to this card, and you should watch out for them. Very slow, obviously not very good against aggressive decks. Even though you're ramping, it's not really what you want to be doing. Treeminder would be better ramped than Hist Grove against aggressive decks. But definitely fantastic in the late game. It sort of switched around the matchups, kind of, actually, because this deck used to be unfavored in the late game against Control Mage, but if you have a Hist Grove at any point, or multiple Hist Grove, is just sealing the deal. 1 Hist Grove is good, 2 is sealing the deal, 3 is just absurd overkill. When you play multiples at the same time against a Control Mage, because they really don't have a good answer at all. And that really does flip it around from where it used to be unfavored against Control Mage in the late game. Control Mages are really having a hard time against Hist Grove, and the fact that my version is playing 3 Blood Magic Lords isn't helping the Control Mage's case much. So this is the deck. Hopefully you give it a shot. Hist Grove is a pretty fun card to play. It's always great to play multiple Swamp Leviathans in a turn without having to actually run them in your deck, because they're subpar by themselves, but for 3 Magicka to play 2, it's kind of reasonable. So hopefully you enjoy and keep experimenting with it. Like I said, I don't think this is the final version, just what I've been testing so far. I will likely put Snake Tooth Necklace in the deck and test it on stream. Hopefully you guys like the deck tech. If you do, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, guys.